The air in the military cantina was thick with smoke and the smell of different alien drinks. Commander Veltaris sat at a corner table, his 4 arms wrapped around a glass of fermented nectar. The blue liquid glowed softly in the dim light. Around him, other soldiers from different worlds talked and laughed after another long day of patrol duty. Lieutenant Kextra, a young Alterian like Veltaris, slammed his drink down on the metal table. His insect-like eyes gleamed with pride. "I tell you, no species in the galaxy can match Alterian combat skills," he said loudly. "Our reflexes are 3 times faster than most races. Our exoskeletons can stop plasma bolts. We are born warriors." The other aliens at nearby tables nodded and murmured agreement. A few raised their drinks in salute. Kextra was young, but he had proven himself in several border conflicts. Most soldiers respected his skill, even if they found his boasting annoying. Veltaris said nothing. He just stared into his drink, watching the blue liquid swirl. His mandibles clicked softly, a sign he was thinking deeply. The younger Alterian noticed his commander's silence. "Commander Veltaris, you agree, yes?" Kextra asked. "Surely you have seen proof of Alterian superiority in your many battles." Veltaris looked up slowly. His compound eyes reflected the cantina lights like tiny mirrors. "I have seen many things in battle, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "Some things I wish I could forget." "Come now, Commander," said Sergeant Threxnell, a large reptilian saurian. "Share your war stories with us. We all know you fought in the Proxima incident 15 years ago. That was a great Federation victory." Other soldiers turned to listen. Veltaris was known as a veteran, but he rarely talked about his past battles. The cantina grew quieter as more aliens gathered around his table. Veltaris finished his drink in one gulp. The nectar burned his throat, but he barely noticed. "The Proxima incident," he repeated slowly. "Yes, it was a victory. But not the kind you might think." He looked around at the eager faces watching him. Young soldiers, most of them. They had heard stories but never experienced real war. They thought they understood what battle meant. "Before I tell you about Proxima," Veltaris said, "let me ask you something. What do you know about humans?" Kextra laughed. "Humans? Those soft pink creatures who joined the Federation 200 years ago. They are decent enough allies, I suppose. Good with technology. But as warriors?" He shook his head. "They have no natural armor, no claws or fangs, no venom. They are weak compared to most species." Several aliens nodded agreement. Humans were common enough in the Federation military, but they were usually assigned to support roles: engineering, communications, medical support. Few alien commanders requested human combat troops. "Weak," Veltaris repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, that is what we all believed. That is what I believed 15 years ago." He signaled the bartender for another drink. While he waited, he began his story. "I was captain then, commanding the ADS Stormwing, an Alterian heavy cruiser. We were part of Joint Task Force 7, patrolling the outer rim near Proxima Centauri. The war with the Vorthak Empire had been going on for 3 years, but most of the fighting was far from Federation core worlds." The bartender brought Veltaris his drink. He took a small sip before continuing. "Our task force had 12 ships, 4 Alterian cruisers, 3 Saurian destroyers, 2 crystalline research vessels, 1 ethereal command ship, and 2 human ships. The humans had the FSS Indomitable, a heavy cruiser, and the FSS Defiant, a destroyer." Veltaris paused, remembering. "The human ships looked strange to us. Where our vessels were smooth and curved, theirs had sharp angles and thick armor. They looked like weapons built to fight, not explore. We thought it was compensation for their physical weakness." "The human commander was Captain Deho," Veltaris continued. "A middle-aged human with graying hair and calm eyes. He was polite at our command meetings, but he rarely spoke unless asked direct questions. Most of us ignored him." Kextra leaned forward. "So what happened? Did you encounter Vorthak forces?" Veltaris nodded slowly. On the third day of patrol, we received a distress signal from the mining colony on Proxima IV. It cut off before we could get details, but long-range sensors showed massive energy signatures in the system. He took another sip of his drink. When we arrived at Proxima, we found a nightmare. The Vorthak Empire had sent a full invasion fleet, over 100 ships, including 3 dreadnoughts. The mining colony was already destroyed. Debris and bodies floated in space around the dead world. The cantina had grown completely quiet now. Even aliens at other tables had stopped talking to listen. Admiral Kethron, our ethereal commander, called an emergency meeting. Veltaris said. The situation was clear. We had 12 ships against over 100. The smart choice was to retreat immediately and warn Federation command. But you stayed and fought? Asked Threxnall. Most of us voted to retreat, Veltaris replied. It was the logical choice. We would have been destroyed in minutes against such numbers. But when Admiral Kethron asked for final opinions, Captain Deho requested permission to speak. Veltaris closed his eyes, remembering that moment. The human stood up at the holographic conference table. He looked at each of us calmly, then said something I will never forget. He said, "The Vorthak fleet will reach the agricultural world of Haven 7 in 6 hours. 3 million civilians live there. They have no defenses and cannot evacuate in time. So?" Kextra asked. "Unfortunate, but what could 12 ships do?" "That is exactly what Admiral Kethron said," Veltaris replied. Captain Deho nodded and said, "You are right, Admiral. 12 ships cannot stop that fleet, but 12 ships might delay them long enough for those civilians to escape." Veltaris opened his eyes and looked around the table. The human was suggesting a suicide mission. We would all die to buy a few hours for strangers we had never met. "Madness," whispered one of the younger aliens. "That is what we thought," Veltaris agreed. Admiral Kethron told Captain Deho that his suggestion was noble but impossible. The human accepted this without argument. He said he understood our position completely. Veltaris paused to drink again. Then Captain Deho made another request. He asked permission for the human ships to separate from the task force. He said his crew had volunteered for independent action. "They were going to attack alone?" Threxnall asked in disbelief. 2 ships against 100, Veltaris confirmed. Admiral Kethron tried to talk them out of it. He pointed out that 2 ships would make no difference. They would die for nothing. What did the human say? Captain Deho smiled, Veltaris said. It was not a happy smile. It was something else. Something that made my exoskeleton feel cold. He said, "Admiral, you are probably right. But my species has a saying, it is better to light one candle than to curse the darkness." Veltaris set down his drink with shaking hands. Even after 15 years, the memory affected him. The human ships broke formation and headed toward the Vorthak fleet. We watched on our sensors as 2 tiny dots moved toward a cloud of over 100 enemy vessels. It should have been over, in minutes. But it was not? Kextra asked quietly. No, Veltaris said. It was not. The humans did something we had never seen before. They did not engage the main fleet directly. Instead, they used their ships like weapons. The FSS Defiant rammed the lead Vorthak dreadnought at full speed. The explosion destroyed both ships but severely damaged 2 more enemy vessels. Several aliens gasped. Ramming attacks were considered primitive and desperate. No civilized species used such tactics. The FSS Indomitable lasted longer, Veltaris continued. Captain Deho had his crew target the Vorthak command ships specifically. They ignored the smaller vessels and focused all their firepower on the fleet commanders. They destroyed 4 command ships before they were finally overwhelmed. So they died uselessly? Asked a young Saurian. We thought so at first, Veltaris replied. But then something strange happened. The Vorthak fleet stopped advancing. Without their command structure, the remaining ships could not coordinate properly. They began arguing among themselves about who should take command. Veltaris looked around the table. 2 human ships had caused enough confusion to delay an entire invasion fleet for 8 hours. Long enough for the civilians on Haven 7 To evacuate completely. The cantina was silent except for the hum of air recyclers. Finally, Kextra spoke. That was brave, he admitted. Foolish, but brave. Still, it was just 2 ships sacrificing themselves. Hardly proof that humans are superior warriors. Veltaris looked at the young lieutenant for a long moment. That was just the beginning, Kextra. What I saw later, what humans are capable of when they truly fight. He shook his head. I learned that day that we had been very wrong about humans. They are not weak. They are something far more dangerous. What do you mean? Threxnal asked. Veltaris stood, up slowly. I mean that humans do not fight the way other species fight. They do not fight for territory or resources or even survival. They fight for ideas, for principles, for people they have never met. He looked around at the watching faces. And that makes them the most terrifying enemies you can imagine. He turned to leave, then paused. The Proxima incident was classified as a minor engagement, a footnote in the war records. But it was the day I realized that humans are not our junior partners in this galaxy. The next evening, Veltaris returned to the cantina to find his table already occupied. Word had spread about his story from the night before. Young soldiers from different species sat waiting for him, their faces full of curiosity and doubt. Lieutenant, Kextra stood up as Veltaris approached. Commander, we have been discussing your story about the human ships at Proxima. Some of us think... He paused, looking uncomfortable. You think I was exaggerating, Veltaris finished calmly. He sat down and ordered his usual fermented nectar. You think 2 ships sacrificing themselves proves nothing about human combat ability. With respect, sir, said a young crystalline officer, her crystal body chiming softly as she spoke. Suicide attacks are not really tactics. They are desperation. Any species might do the same when facing certain death. Veltaris nodded. You are not wrong, Officer Nimlara. What happened at Proxima was remarkable, but it was only the beginning. The real test came 3 months later, during the siege of Outpost Delta 7. He waited for his drink to arrive before continuing. After Proxima, Federation Command decided to establish forward observation posts near Vorthak space. Outpost Delta 7 was built on an asteroid in the Kepler system. It housed long-range sensors and a powerful communications array. Veltaris took a sip of his nectar. The outpost was defended by a mixed garrison, 50 Alterian shock troops, 30 Saurian heavy infantry, 20 crystalline technicians, and 40 human marines. Only 40 humans? Asked Threxnal. The humans were considered support personnel, Veltaris explained. Their job was to maintain equipment and provide backup security. Real defense was the responsibility of Alterian and Saurian forces. Kextra leaned forward. What went wrong? Intelligence went wrong, Veltaris replied. We thought the outpost was secret. We were mistaken. The Vorthak discovered its location and sent a battle fleet to destroy it. 300 ships carrying 50,000 ground troops. Several aliens whistled in amazement. Those were overwhelming numbers for a small outpost. I was commanding the ADS Stormwing again, Veltaris continued. We were part of a relief fleet, but we were 6 days away when the attack began. The outpost commander, Major Kethval, was an experienced Alterian officer. He estimated they could hold for perhaps 12 hours against such numbers. Veltaris paused, remembering. The human marine commander was Major Tae-jun, a tall man with scars on his face and hands that never seemed to stop moving. During the planning meetings, he rarely spoke. When other officers discussed defensive positions and retreat routes, he just listened and nodded. The Vorthak assault began at dawn on the 3rd day, Veltaris said. They landed troops at 6 different points around the asteroid. Within 2 hours, they had overrun the outer defensive ring. Major Kethval ordered a fighting retreat to the inner bunker complex. Standard tactics, Kextra commented. Yes, Veltaris agreed. Standard and logical. The inner bunkers could hold perhaps 200 defenders. They had enough supplies for 3 days. The plan was to hold until relief arrived. Veltaris finished his drink and signaled for another. But Major Taijun made a different suggestion. He asked permission to take his 40 Marines and hold the communications center separately. Why? Asked Officer Nimlara. The communications center was in the outer defensive ring, Veltaris explained. It was already surrounded by Vorthak forces. Major Kethevol told the human it was impossible to hold. He said the Marines would be slaughtered uselessly. Veltaris received his new drink and stared into the glowing blue liquid. Major Taejun smiled when he heard this, the same kind of smile I had seen on Captain Daeho's face. He said, "Sir, if the communications array is destroyed, the relief fleet will not be able to coordinate their attack. They might arrive too late to save anyone." He was right, Threxnell said grudgingly. Yes, Veltaris nodded. Major Kethvol realized this too, but he still refused to authorize what seemed like a suicide mission, so Major Taijun made the same request that Captain Daeho had made. He asked permission for independent action. Veltaris looked around the table. Major Kethvol granted it, probably thinking the humans would be dead within an hour anyway. He was wrong. The humans held that communication center for 72 hours. Impossible, Kekstra said flatly. 40 Marines against thousands. Of enemies? No species could do that. That is what we thought, Veltaris replied. We monitored their communications from the relief fleet. At first, everything seemed normal. Major Taijun reported enemy positions and casualty counts in a calm, professional voice. Veltaris paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. But as the hours passed, something changed. The human voices on the radio became different, harder, colder. What do you mean? Asked a young Saurian sergeant. On the second day, we heard Sergeant Hyunwoo reporting, Veltaris said. He had lost his left arm in an explosion, but he was still fighting. Do you know what he said when asked about medical evacuation? The aliens shook their heads. He said negative on the evacuation, arms gone but the trigger finger still works. Hyunwoo remaining in position. Veltaris's voice was quiet. He fought for another 18 hours with one arm. That is, dedicated, Officer Nimlara said uncertainly. That was nothing, Veltaris continued. Corporal Boram was the unit medic. On the second night, she was wounded by shrapnel in the abdomen. The wound was serious but not immediately fatal. She could have withdrawn to the main bunker for treatment. But she did not? No, Veltaris said. Instead, she performed surgery on herself while enemy fire was hitting the walls around her. She used a hand mirror and basic tools to remove the shrapnel from her own stomach, all while continuing to treat other wounded Marines. Several aliens looked sick. Self-surgery was considered an act of desperation reserved for the most extreme circumstances. The transmissions became stranger as time went on, Veltaris said. The humans stopped reporting casualties in normal terms. Instead of saying 3 wounded, they would say 3 still fighting. Instead of need ammunition, they would say, need more targets. Veltaris took a long drink before continuing. On the third day, something happened that I still do not understand. The Vorthak had been taking prisoners during their assault. It is their custom to capture enemies for interrogation and slave labor. That changed? Asked Threxnall. The humans stopped allowing it, Veltaris said quietly. Not just for themselves, for everyone. When Vorthak forces tried to capture wounded Alterian or Saurian defenders, the human Marines would attack immediately. They would risk their own lives to prevent any prisoner from being taken. Kekstra frowned. That makes no tactical sense. Prisoners cannot fight back. Sometimes it is better to let enemies capture non-essential personnel. That is logical thinking, Veltaris agreed. But humans do not think logically when their protective instincts are triggered. Major Taijun made this clear in his final transmission to Major Kethvol. What did he say? He said, Sir, human Marines do not leave people behind, ever. If you fall back, we will hold this position until you can advance again. If you are captured, we will come for you. If you die, we will make sure you are remembered. That is what humans do. The cantina was quiet except for the soft hum of machinery. Finally, Officer Nimlara spoke. "Commander, you said they held for 72 hours. How did it end?" Veltaris finished his drink. "When the relief fleet arrived, we expected to find ruins and bodies. Instead, we found the communication center, still operational and 40 human Marines still alive." "All of them?" Kextra asked in amazement. "All 40, Veltaris confirmed. Wounded, exhausted, but alive. They had lost no one to enemy action. Not one Marine had been captured or killed. How? We asked Major Taijun that same question, Veltaris said. His answer was simple. He said, "We had a job to do, so we did it." Veltaris stood up slowly. But that was not the most disturbing part. When we examined the battlefield around the communication center, we found over 800 dead Vorthak soldiers, 800 enemies killed by 40 humans. The alien stared at him in shock. But that was still not the worst part, Veltaris continued. The worst part was the condition of the Vorthak bodies. They had not just been killed. They had been hunted, tracked down methodically and eliminated with precision. "You mean the humans pursued fleeing enemies?" asked Threxnal. "I mean the humans had turned the asteroid into a killing ground," Veltaris replied. "They had set traps, ambushes, and snares throughout the tunnel system. Any Vorthak soldier who entered their territory did not leave." Veltaris walked toward the door. When I asked Major Taejun about this, he looked confused. He said, "Commander, they were trying to hurt our friends. What did you expect us to do?" He paused at the exit. I realized then that humans have two modes of operation. In peacetime, they are gentle, helpful, cooperative. But when they perceive a threat to those they protect, he shook his head. They become something else entirely. "What do you mean?" Kextra called after him. "I mean they become apex predators," Veltaris replied. "And apex predators do not just defend territory. They eliminate threats completely." As the cantina door closed behind him, the remaining aliens sat in uncomfortable silence. Outside, Veltaris walked through the dark streets and wondered how to explain the next part of his story. Tomorrow he would On the third night, Veltaris found the cantina packed. Word about his stories had spread throughout the base. Soldiers from every species in the Federation had come to listen. They filled every table and stood along the walls, waiting quietly. As he made his way to his usual spot, Lieutenant Kexitra had saved him a seat, but his expression was troubled. "Commander," he said as Veltaris sat down, "I have been thinking about your story from last night, about the human Marines at Outpost Delta 7. "What troubles you, Lieutenant?" Veltaris asked, ordering his drink. "The numbers," Kextra replied. 40 humans killing 800 Vorthak soldiers. Even with defensive advantages, those numbers seem... He paused, searching for words. "Impossible?" Veltaris suggested. "Inhuman," said a new voice. "Captain Zorthak of the Reptilian Defense." Corpse had joined them. His yellow eyes gleamed in the dim light. Such killing efficiency goes beyond normal combat capability. Veltaris received his fermented nectar and took a small sip. "You are both correct to be disturbed. What happened at Delta 7 was just humans, defending a fixed position. What I saw 6 months later during Operation Silent Thunder was far worse. The cantina grew even quieter. Even aliens at distant tables strained to hear. After the siege, Federation Command realized they had been underestimating human combat effectiveness," Veltaris continued. "They began assigning human units to more dangerous missions, special operations, deep reconnaissance, missions that required..." He paused. "Missions that required certain types of skills." "What kind of skills?" asked Officer Nimlara. "Hunting skills," Veltaris replied quietly. He looked around at the watching faces. The Vorthak had established a major command station in the Arcturus system. It was heavily defended and supplied critical intelligence to their entire sector fleet. Federation Command wanted it destroyed, but conventional assault was impossible. "Too many defenses?" asked Threxnal. "Too many civilians," Veltaris corrected. The Vorthak had built their station inside a captured passenger liner. 3,000 Federation citizens were being held as hostages and forced laborers. Captain Zorthak hissed softly. A difficult tactical problem. Any assault would result in massive civilian casualties. Exactly, Veltaris agreed. Most alien commanders recommended waiting for a better opportunity. The hostages were unfortunate, but saving them seemed impossible without unacceptable losses. But the humans disagreed, Kextra guessed. Captain Jiwan of Human Special Forces volunteered her team for what she called a precision operation, Veltaris said. When Admiral Kethron asked what she meant by precision, she smiled that same cold smile I was learning to recognize. Veltaris took another sip of his drink. She said her team could eliminate the Vorthak command structure while keeping civilian casualties to 0. Admiral Kethran asked how many troops she would need. Her answer was 12. 12 soldiers against an entire command station? Officer Nimlara asked in disbelief. That was Admiral Kethran's reaction too, Veltaris said. He pointed out that the station held over 500 Vorthak military personnel plus automated defenses. Captain Jiwan nodded and said that was actually helpful information. Helpful how? She said it meant her team would not run out of targets, Veltaris replied. Several aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I was assigned as the alien liaison officer, Veltaris continued. My job was to monitor the operation and provide tactical analysis. I thought I would be watching a failed rescue attempt. He paused, remembering. The human team infiltrated the station through the waste disposal system. Not the most dignified entry, but it avoided the sensor grid. I watched on remote cameras as they emerged inside the station's lower levels. What happened then? Asked Captain Zorthak. Nothing for almost an hour, Veltaris said. The humans simply disappeared. Our sensors could not track them. The station's internal security showed no signs of intrusion. It was as if 12 people had simply vanished. Then the killing began. Veltaris finished his drink and signaled for another. The first Vorthak to die was a patrol guard on level 7. He was found in a maintenance closet with his neck broken. No weapons discharge, no struggle, no witnesses. Professional elimination, Captain Zorthak commented approvingly. That was just the beginning, Veltaris said. Over the next 6 hours, Vorthak soldiers began disappearing throughout the station, not in groups, one at a time, quietly, efficiently. How many? Asked Kextra. 57, Veltaris replied immediately. I remember the exact number because I was tracking each casualty report. The Vorthak commanders started panic sweeps, sending teams to search every corridor and room. Did they find the humans? Sometimes, Veltaris said darkly, when the humans wanted to be found. Sergeant Minho was particularly effective at this. He would let Vorthak search teams almost discover him, then lead them into prepared killing zones. Veltaris received his new drink but did not touch it. I watched him hunt a 6-man Vorthak patrol through the ventilation system. He stayed just ahead of them, leaving traces for them to follow. When they reached the junction he had chosen, he dropped flashbang grenades and eliminated all 6 before they could react. Impressive tactics, admitted Threxnal. It was not just tactics, Veltaris said. It was psychology. Specialist Unjai was responsible for what she called morale operations. She would leave messages for surviving Vorthak soldiers. What kind of messages? In their own language, written in the blood of their dead comrades, Veltaris said quietly. Messages like, "You cannot hide," and "We are coming for you," and "Surrender the civilians and you might live." Several aliens looked sick. Psychological warfare was considered a legitimate tactic, but few species used such brutal methods. The Vorthak command structure began to break down, Veltaris continued. Officers were afraid to give orders because human snipers were targeting anyone who took command. Soldiers refused to patrol alone because isolated personnel always disappeared. How long did this continue? Asked Officer Nimlara. 18 hours, Veltaris replied. By the end, the Vorthak were so terrified that they had barricaded themselves in the central command center with the civilian hostages. They thought the barriers would protect them. They were wrong? Captain Jiwan's team did not attack the barricades, Veltaris said. Instead, they took control of the station's life support systems. They began shutting down power section by section, forcing the Vorthak to choose between staying in darkness or coming out to restore systems. Clever, admitted Captain Zorthak. When the Vorthak sent repair teams, the humans would kill them and leave their bodies as warnings, Veltaris continued. When the Vorthak tried to use civilian hostages as shields, Specialist Wu Jin would put sniper rounds through Vorthak heads from impossible angles without touching the humans they were hiding behind. Veltaris finally took a sip of his drink. His hands were shaking slightly. The psychological pressure broke them, he said. After 20 hours, the surviving Vorthak officers surrendered unconditionally. They released all civilian hostages and laid down their weapons. A complete victory, Kekstra said. Yes, Veltaris agreed. But the cost? He shook his head. When the operation ended, we found that 12 humans had eliminated over 300 Vorthak soldiers. Not one civilian was harmed. Not one human was killed or seriously wounded. Incredible efficiency, Captain Zorthak said admiringly. Terrifying efficiency, Veltaris corrected. When I asked Captain Jiwan how her team had achieved such results, she looked confused by the question. Confused how? She said, Commander, they were threatening innocent people. We could not allow that to continue. As if the answer was obvious. Veltaris stood up slowly. I asked her if the humans felt any remorse about the killing. She thought about this seriously, then said, We feel sorry for their families. But the Vorthak made their choice when they decided to hurt civilians. Logical reasoning, Officer Nimlara said. No, Veltaris replied. That is the terrifying part. It was not logical reasoning. It was instinct. Humans have evolved to protect their pack, their tribe, their species. When they identify someone as part of their group, they will eliminate any threat to that person without hesitation or remorse. He walked toward the door. The 3,000 hostages were not even the same species as the human rescue team, but Captain Jiwan's people treated them as family worth dying for. That seems admirable, Kekstra said uncertainly. Veltaris paused at the exit. It is admirable, Lieutenant. It is also the most dangerous characteristic any species can possess, because humans do not just protect their own kind. They protect anyone they consider innocent or helpless. What do you mean? I mean that humans have expanded their protective instincts to include the entire galaxy, Veltaris replied. Every species in the Federation is now part of their pack, and they will hunt anyone who threatens the pack with the same ruthless efficiency I saw on that station. The cantina door closed behind him, leaving dozens of alien soldiers to contemplate what they had just heard. Outside, Veltaris looked up at the stars and remembered Captain Jiwan's final words to him. Commander, we are not killers. We are protectors. The difference is important. Tomorrow he would tell them about the Battle of Kepler Station. Tomorrow, he would explain what happens when humans choose to accept massive casualties. By the fourth night, the cantina could not hold everyone who wanted to hear Veltaris speak. Base Command had to move the gathering to the main assembly hall. Hundreds of soldiers from dozens of species filled the chairs and stood along the walls. Even senior officers had come to listen. Veltaris felt uncomfortable with so much attention, but he had started this story and needed to finish it. He stood at the front of the hall with a microphone, looking out at the sea of alien faces watching him. Tonight I will tell you about the Battle of Kepler Station. He began without introduction. It was the largest space engagement of the Vorthak War, and the day I understood what humans truly value above their own lives. The hall was silent except for the hum of air systems. Even officers stopped checking their data pads to listen. The battle began when Vorthak forces captured Kepler Station, the primary fuel depot for the Federation's Outer Rim fleet, Veltaris continued. Without that facility, our entire defensive line would collapse within weeks. The station was heavily fortified and protected by a massive Vorthak battle fleet, he said. But the real problem was that they had taken 3,000 Federation personnel as prisoners and were using them as human shields around their command ship. Admiral Rothgar of the Saurian fleet stood up. Commander, I was at that battle. The tactical situation was impossible. Any assault would have resulted in massive prisoner casualties. Yes, Admiral, Belterris acknowledged. That was the assessment of every alien commander present, including myself. He paused, looking around the room. I was commanding the ADS, Stormwing, as part of Admiral Kethran's task force. We had 60 ships against the Vorthax 85. The odds were difficult but manageable, except for the prisoner situation. The Vorthak command ship was surrounded by a ring of transport vessels containing Federation prisoners, Belterris explained. Any weapons fire directed at their flagship would hit the transports first. It was a perfect defensive strategy. Lieutenant Kexitra, now sitting in the front row, raised his hand. What was the Federation response? Admiral Kethran called a conference with all ship commanders, Belterris replied. The consensus was clear. We could not risk 3,000 lives to retake one station, even a critical one. The recommendation was to withdraw and develop an alternative strategy. But the humans disagreed? Asked Captain Zorthak. Admiral Haijin of the Human Expeditionary Fleet requested permission to speak, Belterris said. She was a small woman, with gray hair and calm eyes. Most of us had barely noticed her during the approach to Kepler. Belterris activated a holographic display showing the battle formation. Admiral Haijin stood up and said something that shocked every alien commander present. She said, "We will not abandon Federation personnel to the enemy. Not ever." Admiral Kethran explained the tactical impossibility. Belterris continued. He showed her the sensor displays, the prisoner positions, the casualty projections. Admiral Haijin listened politely, then said, "I understand the difficulties, Admiral, but understanding a problem is different from accepting it." The hall murmured with interest. Several officers leaned forward to hear better. She asked for permission to take the human fleet on an independent mission, Belterris said. Admiral Kethran asked what kind of mission. Admiral Haijin smiled and said, "A rescue operation." "How many ships did the humans have?" asked Admiral Rothgar. 15 vessels, Belterris replied, against 85 enemy ships positioned in perfect defensive formation. It should have been massacre. What was their plan? That was what Admiral Kethran wanted to know. Belterris said. Admiral Haijin's answer was simple. She said, "We are going to go get our people, Admiral. The Vorthak can try to stop us if they want." Belterris touched a control, and the holographic display showed ship movements. The human fleet separated from our formation and advanced directly toward the Vorthak defensive line. No subtlety, no complex tactics. Just 15 ships flying straight into overwhelming enemy fire. "Suicide," someone whispered. "That was what we thought," Belterris agreed. "But we were wrong about what the humans were planning. They were not trying to win a space battle. They were trying to rescue prisoners." The display showed the human fleet taking heavy fire as they approached the enemy formation. The FSS Constitution was the first ship destroyed, Belterris said quietly. Direct hit from a Vorthak dreadnought. All hands lost. The FSS Liberty was crippled next, but her crew kept fighting with auxiliary power until the ship broke apart. He continued. The FSS Freedom rammed a Vorthak cruiser to clear a path for the other ships. The hall was completely silent now. Even the air system seemed quieter. Commander Subin of the FSS Valor led the actual rescue mission, Belterris said. While other human ships engaged the main Vorthak fleet, she took her ship directly into the prisoner transport area. "How?" asked Lieutenant Kextra. "She flew the Valor through the middle of a fire zone that should have destroyed any vessel." "Instantly," Belterris replied. When I asked her later how she survived, she said, "Commander, when people are counting on you, the ship flies itself." Belterris changed the display to show the rescue operation. Commander Subin's crew began docking with prisoner transports under heavy fire. They had to breach the hulls manually because the Vorthak had destroyed the docking mechanisms. While this was happening, Lieutenant Wu Jin of the FSS Endeavour was leading a fighter squadron against impossible odds, Belterris continued. His mission was to keep Vorthak fighters away from the rescue ships. What happened to his squadron? They flew into a formation of 200 enemy fighters, Belterris said. 20 human fighters against 200 Vorthak interceptors. Lieutenant Wu Jin's final transmission was, "Rescue ships, you are clear to proceed. We will hold them as long as possible." Veltaris's voice was barely audible. His squadron lasted 18 minutes against those odds. 18 minutes of impossible flying and perfect shooting. When it was over, 70 Vorthak fighters were destroyed and every human pilot was dead. The hall was so quiet that individual breathing could be heard. But the rescue succeeded? Admiral Rothgar asked quietly. Commander Subin's team extracted all 3,000 prisoners, Veltaris confirmed. Every single Federation citizen was saved. But the cost... He paused, struggling with the memory. Of 15 human ships, only 3 survived the battle. Over 8,000 human crew members died to save 3,000 prisoners of mixed species. That ratio makes no tactical sense, said a crystalline officer. No, Veltaris agreed. It makes no sense to any logical military analysis. But that was not how the humans saw it. What do you mean? When I asked Admiral Heijin about the casualties, she said something I will never forget, Veltaris replied. She said, "Commander, we did not lose 8,000 people. We saved 3,000. The math is different when you are counting. Lives instead of ships." Veltaris deactivated the holographic display. But the most disturbing part came after the battle. When Federation Command reviewed the action reports, they found something unexpected in the human ship logs. What? Every human crew member had volunteered for the mission, Veltaris said. Not just the officers, everyone. Engineers, medics, communications specialists, maintenance crews. They all knew the odds, and they all chose to go anyway. Why? Asked Lieutenant Kekstra. I asked Lieutenant Commander Mincio of the FSS Defiance that same question, Veltaris replied. Her ship was one of the 3 that survived. She looked at me like I had asked why water was wet. What did she say? She said, "Commander, they were Federation citizens in danger. What else were we supposed to do?" Veltaris shook his head. To her, the choice was obvious. Save the prisoners or die trying. There was no third option. Admiral Rothgar stood up again. "Commander, I respect human courage, but such losses cannot be justified by any military standard." "You are right, Admiral," Veltaris agreed. By military standards, the human losses were unacceptable, but humans do not always use military standards. What do you mean? I mean they sometimes use moral standards instead, Veltaris replied. And by moral standards, the Battle of Kepler Station was not a costly victory. It was a perfect success. He looked around the room at hundreds of alien faces. Every Federation citizen went home to their families. Every human who died chose to die for something they believed was more important than their own life. That is, Lieutenant Kekstra started, then stopped. Terrifying? Veltaris suggested. Yes, it is, because it means humans will accept any level of casualties to protect people they consider innocent. He walked toward the exit. After Kepler Station, I realized that humans are not just our allies. They are our guardians. They have appointed themselves protectors of every peaceful species in the galaxy. And if we are ever threatened, asked Admiral Rothgar. Veltaris paused at the door. Then the galaxy will see what humans become when something they love is in danger. And I pray to whatever gods exist that I never have to witness that horror. The assembly hall remained silent. Long after he left, hundreds of soldiers contemplating what they had learned about their human allies. Outside, Veltaris walked through the base and wondered how to explain the final lesson of his story. Tomorrow he would tell them why he trusted humans despite being terrified of them. Tomorrow he would reveal the truth about... On the 5th night, the base assembly hall was not large enough. Command had to use the main parade ground, setting up speakers and screens so everyone could see and hear. Over 2,000 Federation personnel gathered under the artificial lights, representing every species and service branch. Veltaris stood on the raised platform, looking out at the largest audience he had ever addressed. Military officials from other bases had arrived specifically for this final session. Even some civilian researchers and diplomats were present. 4 nights ago, Lieutenant Kekstra asked me what I knew about humans, Veltaris began. Tonight I will tell you what I have learned from 15 years of fighting beside them. He paused, organizing his thoughts. First, let me answer the questions I know you are thinking. Yes, everything I have told you is true. Yes, there are detailed records of every engagement I have described. And yes, there are many other stories I have not shared because they are even more disturbing. A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the crowd. But tonight is not about more war stories, Velataris continued. Tonight is about why I choose to serve with humans, despite being terrified of what they can do. Admiral Kethron, who had arrived that afternoon, stood up. Commander, your stories have been educational, but they raise serious questions about human psychological stability. Should we be concerned about our alliance with such an aggressive species? That is exactly the wrong question, Admiral, Velataris replied. You are thinking like prey instead of thinking like an apex predator. The crowd murmured with interest. Several senior officers leaned forward. Let me explain what I mean, Velataris said. After the Battle of Kepler Station, I requested assignment to human-led units exclusively. My superiors thought I had developed some kind of psychological trauma. They sent me for evaluation. What did the evaluators find? Asked Dr. Yimlara, a crystalline psychologist. They found that I was perfectly sane, Velataris replied. But they could not understand my logic. So I will explain it to you the same way I explained it to them. He activated the holographic display, showing a map of Federation space. This is our galaxy today. Peaceful, prosperous, secure. Do you know why? The Federation military maintains order, suggested Admiral Rothgar. No, Velataris said. The Federation military is a peacekeeping force. We respond to conflicts and crises. But we do not prevent wars from starting. Humans do that. How? By being exactly what I have described over the past 4 nights, Velataris replied. Every potential aggressor in the galaxy knows what humans will do if peaceful species are threatened. He changed the display to show recent conflict zones. In the past 15 years, there have been 37 border disputes that could have escalated to full war. None of them did. Do you know why? Federation diplomacy, suggested a Saurian colonel. Federation diplomacy backed by human enforcement, Velataris corrected. When the hegemony threatened the mining colonies of Tau Ceti, human battleships arrived, within days. When the corporate states tried to enslave the agricultural worlds of Epsilon Eridani, human marines appeared in their capital cities overnight. You make it sound like humans are galactic police, said Lieutenant Kextra. Not police, Velataris replied. Guardians. There is a difference. Police enforce laws. Guardians protect principles. He looked around at the watching faces. Humans do not care about territorial disputes or trade agreements. They only care about one thing: protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. Dr. Yimlara stood up. Commander, that sounds admirable in theory, but unlimited moral authority in the hands of such a violent species seems dangerous. You think humans are violent? Velataris asked. Let me tell you about violence. He changed the display to show casualty statistics. In the 15 years since Kepler Station, human forces have been deployed in 43 separate conflicts. In those conflicts, they have killed approximately 50,000 enemy combatants. That seems like a significant number, Dr. Yimlara observed. In the same period, Velataris continued, they have saved over 3 million civilian lives through rescue operations, disaster relief, and humanitarian missions. The crowd fell silent as they absorbed those numbers. More importantly, Velataris said, in 15 years of having the most powerful military force in galactic history, humans have never used their strength to conquer territory, extract resources, or impose their government on other species. Never? Asked Admiral Kethran skeptically. Never, Velataris confirmed. When humans defeat an enemy, they do not occupy their worlds or demand tribute. They simply ensure the enemy cannot threaten innocent people again. Then they leave. He deactivated the display and walked to the edge of the platform. Let me tell you what happened after each of the battles I have described. After the Proxima incident, Captain Deho was promoted to Admiral and given command of the Frontier Defense Fleet, Velataris said. His first action was to establish refugee processing centers for displaced Vorthax civilians. After the siege of Outpost Delta 7, Major Taejun was assigned to train Federation Marines in what humans call protective combat techniques. He continued. He now teaches other species how to hold defensive positions without the psychological cost humans pay. After Operation Silent Thunder, Captain Jiwon was promoted to head of Special Operations Command, Veltaris said. She established protocols to minimize civilian casualties during covert missions. And after the Battle of Kepler Station, Admiral Hagen was given command of the Federation's Rapid Response Fleet, he concluded. Her ships now arrive at crisis zones before conflicts can escalate to war. Lieutenant Kexitra raised his hand. Commander, what you are describing sounds like humans have become the unofficial rulers of Federation space. No, Veltaris replied firmly. Rulers impose their will on subjects. Humans do the opposite. They ask what each species needs to be, safe and prosperous. Then they make sure no one interferes with those needs. But they have the power to impose their will if they chose to, Dr. Yamlara pointed out. Yes, Veltaris agreed, and that is exactly why they can be trusted. Power that chooses not to be used is the only power that can be trusted completely. He walked back to the center of the platform. Let me ask you all a question. In your home systems, how many of you sleep peacefully because you know human ships patrol the outer boundaries? Hundreds of hands went up throughout the crowd. How many of you have family members who are alive today because human rescue teams responded to natural disasters or industrial accidents? Even more hands rose. How many of you serve in units where humans have volunteered for the most dangerous assignments to keep non-human personnel safe? Nearly every hand in the crowd was now raised. That is why I trust humans, Veltaris said quietly. Not because they cannot hurt me, but because they choose not to hurt anyone who does not deserve it. Admiral Kethron stood up again. Commander, your points are well taken. But you still have not explained why you specifically choose to serve with human units. Veltaris smiled, his mandibles clicking with what might have been amusement. Because, Admiral, I have learned something that took me 15 years to understand fully, which is, humans are not just protecting other species from external threats, Veltaris replied. They are protecting other species from themselves. What do you mean? I mean that humans have absorbed all the moral costs of maintaining galactic peace, Veltaris explained. They do the terrible things that need to be done so the rest of us do not have to become terrible ourselves. He looked around at the crowd. Every species in the Federation has the capacity for violence and cruelty, but we do not have to use that capacity because humans have made themselves responsible for dealing with the violent and cruel. You are saying humans sacrifice their own innocence to preserve ours? Dr. Yamlara asked. I am saying humans understand, something the rest of us have forgotten, Veltaris replied. Peace is not a natural state, it requires constant effort and occasional violence to maintain. Humans have accepted that burden for all of us. Lieutenant Kextra spoke up. But Commander, if humans are as dangerous as you say, what happens if they ever decide we are the threat? Veltaris was quiet for a long moment. That, Lieutenant, is the question that should keep us all honest. What do you mean? I mean that having humans as our guardians means we must always remember what we are being protected from, Veltaris replied. We must never become the kind of species that threatens innocent people. Because humans would stop us? Because humans would have to stop us, Veltaris corrected. And they would hate themselves for it. But they would do it anyway, because that is what guardians do. He walked toward the exit. I serve with humans because I want to be worthy of their protection. I want to be the kind of person they risk their lives to save. And I want to help them carry the burden of keeping the galaxy safe. Commander, Admiral Kethron called after him. One final question. After everything you have witnessed, do you believe humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy? Veltaris paused and turned back to face the crowd. No, Admiral. I believe humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. There is a difference. Explain. Humans are dangerous to threats, Beltaris said. They are safe for everyone else. And in a galaxy full of different species with Diffie,